this country. So this is my story. If you have any questions, please ask me, because you have a half hour. And I would like some questions, please. Yes?
You say you or do not have books for sale.
Yes, I have my book here.
Do you have some to sell to us?
Yes. You have a question?
Yes, would you know of the people from your village that were expelled? How many survived?
Well, a lot of them were taken away, you know, and I really can't tell you how many survived, because I am telling you this as a child. And Anne probably knows, because she's gone through this. Our people do not like to talk. If my mother would not have been with me, I would not know the story, because she never talked. My father, on the other hand, he told us all about Russia. My father had a hard time believing that we went through such terrible times. He had a very hard time because he felt like he wasn't a good provider, which was silly because he wasn't there. How could he provide? Any other questions?
How many people survived actually from Russia? You have an idea?
See, I am not a good numbers person. I tell my story. If you read my book, you'll get a few numbers, but my father survived. My father's story is in the book. And my father, well, maybe you'd like to hear how my father got out of Russia. My father was very sick. In 1945, in winter, 1945 in the winter, they took him and all with the transport. They took all these people that they took from Romania, from Hungary, from Yugoslavia. They took to which we called Russia, which was the Soviet Union. And my father actually was in Ukraine. He said, as they were in the train, all they had, they were on top of each other, was a hole for a toilet. And every few days they opened up they were locked in the train. Every few days they opened up and threw in food. And they didn't even get water every day. And they unhooked the trains as they got further into the Soviet Union. And they were spread all over. My father ended up in the coal mines. And my father said it was so cold that if you spit, it would freeze before it hit the ground. And they were not really dressed for this kind of weather. And they were all put in these barracks. The conditions were so bad that all they got was they got a sour soup, cabbage soup. And one time they got cabbage soup with a horse foot in it. That was the meat. And my father got scurvy so bad that spring they didn't have enough room for all these people. So in the spring they put up this tent, and they were laid on the ground. And he was one of them. And every morning, most of the guards were women, would come and poke him on the leg, and they'd call Ivan. They called him Ivan. John was his name. Are you still alive? And if he answered, well, then you were. So one day, this committee came through, and they made a list of all the sick. And the sick were supposed to go home, but they didn't go home until a year later. So they died, and the ones that were sick when it was time to go home, they weren't on the list, so they had to stay there. And he was on the list because he was so sick. That spring, he crawled on all fours out the tent. He couldn't walk anymore. And he made himself from dandelions. He made tea and drank the tea and stopped eating the cabbage soup. And he revived himself, and he actually pulled through. So he was let go in '46 in the fall, and they put him on a transport train to East Germany. And when he got to East Germany, there were so many people on the streets that they put all these prisoners and all these into Germany, East Germany, that there wasn't enough food. So they ended up putting them in prison again, just so they wouldn't roam the streets. And people were peeling the barks off the trees and cooking it so they would have food. And he thought, I survived Russia, I will not die here. So he got his uncle and a couple of other men, and they, on foot, managed to get to Germany, which you'll have to read the book because I can't stay here and tell you the whole story. And ended up in Munich. Now this this is an interesting story, what happened to him. They went begging. He had on his body, they were full of lice, by the way. He hadn't taken a bath for months. He had galoshes with no shoes on. He had a Russian army jacket that was quilted, full of lice, and they went begging. So he went in Munich, he came to this yard, and there was a woman hanging up clothes. And he went up to him to beg for her, for food. And as she turned around, it was a woman from Karlsdorf. It was a neighbor. And he was shocked. And she didn't recognize him. Then finally he said, Katy, kennst mich nicht? Katie, don't you know me? And she looked at him, and he said, no. Then she told him, you know, and this is how my father found out that he was going home to Yugoslavia. Back home, he didn't know that was happening to us. And she said, don't you know what happened? And he said, no. And he said, well, you better stay here and pray that your family comes to you. And in 1947, in November, we did. So that's, we lived in bombed-out Munich. But this was almost harder on me because we were surrounded with Oktoberfest. We were surrounded with, across the street was an ice cream parlor. At Christmas time was a Christkindlmarkt, and we had no money. So sometimes I'd get 15 pennies, and on every corner there was vendors with candy. And I used to go there, and I'd look at the chocolate, and I look at this, all these different things, and I didn't have any money, and then I'd give my 15 cents. I usually bought the same thing, was English toffee, because it was 15 cents and it lasted a long time. You could chew forever. And when I go to schools, the kids get a big kick out of this. I had my first chocolate bar when I was 8. In Munich, in Europe after the war, you couldn't exist unless you dealt with the black market. My father took us to this friend's house who happened to do that. And I remember this was a small room and it had all these boxes. And he said to me, he said, would you like a chocolate bar? And I said, what is that? And he said, here. And he handed me this brown, thin bar with Hershey written on it. I opened it up. I bit into it. Man, did I like chocolate. That was my first chocolate bar. Second chocolate bar. We went in the summer, we went to like day camp. And the teacher said, today we have a treat. And she handed everybody a chocolate bar. And I thought, oh, I know what this is. I'm not eating this. I'm saving this for lunch. So I stuck it in my pocket. Every little girl had a schürzel, an apron to keep her clothes, because we didn't have too many clothes, clean. So I put this in the pocket, and I couldn't wait for lunchtime. It was a hot day. I ate my sandwich. I stuck my hand in my pocket. Now I'm going to get my treat. I pull my hand out. I'm full of chocolate. Oh, never mind. I took my apron off, turned my